Story 1. The Man with the Stroller. Halloween is often filled with mystery and thrill, but my most unforgettable Halloween memory still haunts me to this day. I was around 7 or 8 years old when my mother dropped me off at my friend Sean's house for a night of trick-or-treating. Sean, Johnny and I were ready for an evening of adventure, but things quickly took a turn none of us could have expected. Sean's house always felt off. The place had a distinct smell, like it hadn't been cleaned in ages. His older sister, who was about 20, seemed to have taken on a parental role, but with an unusual detachment. She often ignored my presence entirely, as though I was just another piece of furniture in the room. Despite the strange dynamic, I was excited for the night ahead, but a sense of unease crept in when I learned that no adult would be supervising us. Part of me felt the thrill of independence. Another part was unsettled, knowing that my mom would never have approved of us wandering the streets alone. As the sun set and the cool evening air filled with the sounds of laughter and rustling leaves, we began our trick-or-treating spree, our pillowcases eager to be filled with candy. We roamed the streets, lying to curious neighbors that Sean's mom was just a block away, supervising from afar. After a while, we returned to Sean's place to refuel on frozen pizzas and Halloween specials on Nickelodeon. The night felt carefree and exhilarating, but when Johnny's mom picked him up, Sean and I decided to keep the Halloween spirit alive and headed back out. It was dark now, and the streets were much quieter. As we walked, we noticed a man pushing a stroller down the sidewalk, moving slowly toward us. At first, we thought he was just a dad trick-or-treating with his kid. But as he got closer, something about his presence felt wrong. The man greeted us with a friendly smile, asking how our night was going. He mentioned he had extra candy at his house nearby and offered to share it with us. With the promise of free candy, Sean and I exchanged excited glances. Following him down the dimly lit street, my apprehension grew. His questions felt invasive, probing into our lives, our neighborhood, our school. As he pushed the stroller along, he would glance into it and talk softly in a high-pitched voice, supposedly to his sleeping daughter. When we finally reached his house, he invited us inside, saying he'd grab the candy. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I whispered to Sean, questioning why we needed to go inside for something so simple. Sean was curious and led the way, lifting the cover of the stroller to see the baby. But his face paled as he backed away quickly, whispering for us to leave. We bolted out the door, our hearts racing. Just then, a woman from the neighborhood approached, concerned. When we explained what had happened, she confirmed our worst fear. The man had no child. She drove us home. And though I've tried to move past that night, the memory lingers, casting a shadow over Halloween ever since. Story 2. The Clown at the Door. Halloween night, 2016, started like any other for me. My parents had tasked me with handing out candy to trick-or-treaters. Living in a cul-de-sac, we rarely saw more than a handful of kids, and this particular year was no exception. My mum had, as usual, overbought candy, filling bags that I knew would be haunting our pantry for weeks to come. The evening unfolded with its usual mix of knocks and bell rings, my dog, Vito, barking in the background each time the door opened. By around 8 p.m., the streets grew quiet, and I thought my Halloween duties were over. I had finished my homework and decided to unwind with an episode of Game of Thrones. But at 9:30 p.m., long past the cutoff for trick-or-treaters, the doorbell rang again. My pulse quickened as I opened the door, only to be met by a towering figure in a clown costume. The mask was grotesque, with exaggerated features and a menacing smile that seemed too realistic. The clown waved at me, gesturing to his near-empty sack, but I didn't open the door. Through the glass, I simply apologized, explaining we were out of candy before slamming it shut and locking it immediately. My mind raced and I regretted even approaching the door. I had assumed it would be one last child accompanied by a late-working parent. Instead, it was a full-grown man dressed to terrify. Just when I thought he'd leave, the doorbell rang again, louder this time. I scooped up Vito and took him upstairs, hoping the lights-off approach would convince this uninvited guest that the night was over. As I tried to calm my racing heart, I heard a loud snap. The latch on the storm door had broken, and the unmistakable sound of the knob jiggling reached my ears. In a panic, I texted my family group chat, hoping someone would respond, but no one did. My only consolation was that sooner or later, he'd have to give up. But as silence settled back in, Vito started growling at my window. This didn't make sense. My bedroom was on the second floor, and there was no way anyone could reach the window. With every thump on the glass, dread seeped into my bones, paralyzing me as I realized the clown might be outside my window. I held my breath, listening intently. Just as I was about to look, Vito's bark filled the room, and I grabbed him, hiding under my bed. I prayed the man would disappear, but part of me knew he wasn't gone. The Halloween night had become a nightmare, one I'll never shake. Story 3. The Stranger in the Dark. In college, Halloween nights were for dressing up, parties, and pretending you weren't afraid of the dark. But one Halloween taught me that some things are worth fearing. It was my sophomore year, and I was home alone, with my roommates gone for the night. The house was dark except for the jack-o'-lantern on our porch, which flickered softly in the stillness. I'd just finished binge-watching horror movies, the perfect ambience for the holiday, when I decided to lock up and head to bed. As I secured the door, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. A figure was lurking across the street, hidden partially by shadows. At first, I brushed it off as a late-night trick-or-treater, but something was different. This person was staring directly at our house, unmoving. Their presence was like a black hole, pulling my focus even as I tried to convince myself it was nothing. I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, telling myself that I was safe inside. But no sooner had I reached my room than I heard a faint tap on the window. My heart skipped a beat. My window faced the backyard, and it was impossible for someone to reach it without a ladder. I stayed frozen, staring at the silhouette outside, which seemed to grow closer with each passing moment. As I backed away, my phone buzzed with a message from my roommate, asking if everything was okay. They'd seen a man on our street earlier that day, dressed in black and walking slowly past our house repeatedly. The tapping grew louder, and I shut my curtains, heart racing as I dialed 911. The operator's voice was calm, soothing, assuring me that help was on the way. I waited, the minutes feeling like hours, until flashing red and blue lights illuminated my window. I dared a glance and saw the figure retreating into the darkness, disappearing as mysteriously as he'd appeared. Halloween has never been the same for me since that night, and the fear of what might lurk outside remains with me every year.